again. I apologize for not having a lesson last week. Last week I usually record in this room, and this room was completely booked up. And then between that and just other programs that I was running throughout the week, I was not able to record a lesson. But I will definitely make sure that you get your lesson this week, even if it is Thanksgiving. I will just make sure to post it ahead of time. Alright, today we're going to be talking about 10 things that make people skip prologues. Now, a lot of you might think, what idiot would skip a prologue? They're so vital and pivotal. Well, that's because you're a writer. Sorry, I have something on my glasses. It's driving me crazy. Unfortunately, readers don't feel the same way. Most readers feel like prologues are an excuse to pump in a lot of stuff that is just pure boring. The reason why is because of the fact that in a lot of classical literature, novels, and older novels, it was used as such an excuse. Nowadays, that is not the case. It has become far more refined, but it is hard for people to break old habits. That being said, that's what we're going to talk about today. But before then, I wanted to just give a quick little promotion. We have a first chapter writing contest going on right now. The deadline is November 30th, so please try to get it in before then. The library will be closed on this Thursday, so the 23rd through the 25th, but then we will be open again from the 27th until the 30th. So please try to get your entries in before the 30th. We will cut off taking entries 15 minutes before we close, so try to make sure you get in well before 9 o'clock. We will cut it off at 8:45. If you are not sure you're going to make it by then, make sure that you give me a call and say, hey, I'm going to be coming in like just under the wire, 8:55. Just let me know, so that way I can make sure that I count it as still being legitimate. Make sure that your first chapters are turned in by the 30th. I know that I'm repeating myself, but I really would love to see a lot of you guys enter. It's a 1,500 word minimum and a 3,000 word maximum. I would love to see what you guys do. There are entry forms at the desk at the upstairs section of the library. Yeah, please enter. I would love to have more entrants. I've only had a few so far. All right. So, 10 things that make people skip prologues. Number 1, the most common mistake that is the reason why people skip prologues is info dumping. If you are just going world building, character, world building, character, world building, that's what makes your reader go, I'm done, and skip the prologue altogether and say, maybe the first chapter will be better. Unfortunately, that means they might miss out on a lot if that was all pivotal and important. But there are ways to integrate that info dumping in a way that is more palatable. Don't info dump. I would say build your background slowly. If you're going to do world building dump, make sure that it is in a way that makes sense. Have a character that's asking a lot of questions, or have a display of the magic, so you're not telling us what it's doing, but you're showing us what it's doing. Make sure that you avoid info dumping at all costs, because that is going to be immediate turnoff for your reader, and they're going to want to skip it. Next thing is villain backstory done poorly. Now, villain backstory as a prologue can be very interesting and intriguing, but a villain backstory done poorly just makes the reader go, do I really want to read about something like this? And that's where you're going to run into problems. Now, villain backstory done poorly includes info dumping, yes, but it also includes complete and utter psychosis from the beginning. Generally, with a backstory, you want to make sure that you demonstrate how they weren't psychotic before this. Something changed them. Something made them different. Something broke them. Even people who are truly psychotic serial killers generally have something that broke them. They were maybe not stable. They weren't good people before then. Serial killers are never good people. But they at least pretended to be. And something finally pushed them over the edge that made them no longer want to pretend anymore. And that's important to know. As a reader, we want to know those things. As a reader, there's this morbid sense of curiosity that the reader wants the author to fulfill. And that is why villain backstories tend to get skipped if they do not fulfill that morbid curiosity, if they don't show the turning point, if they just have them being evil for no reason, completely irredeemable, it doesn't feel real. Now, if you are doing some sort of villain that's like completely just Eye of Sauron kind of thing, like Lord of the Rings, where it's completely evil from the beginning and always was evil, then I would say make sure you establish the fear that other people feel when experiencing this thing. Because generally, you want to link us to some sort of emotion, link us to what we should be feeling as a reader about this thing. Alright, next thing is a character or plot point with no relevance that we never see again. This will make people skip prologues all the time. Why do people skip prologues? For this reason. Now, the main problem is you might say, well, how do they know that it'll have a character or a plot point that will have no relevance and we'll never see it again? People assume that nowadays. That's part of the reason why a lot of people say prologues are going by the wayside, is because of the fact that so many people did it wrong for so long that people just assume the worst. However, I would say if it has a character that is listed on the back of the book, that'll help people know that it has relevance. So generally, I would say don't start with a character that is not going to have relevance to the plot. And if they have plot pivotal relevance, make sure that you explain how they are relevant within the first paragraph. And don't info dump in the first paragraph. Just make it very clear, even in the description. You could do a very basic description and make it perfectly clear how relevant they are to the plot. For example, if you're in the middle of a war and you're talking about the fact that this guy is standing looking out over a battlefield about ready to charge in, and you introduce him as General so-and-so, all of a sudden we're like, oh, that's why he's important, because we're in the middle of a war and he's a general. There are ways to do it without info dumping. Next thing is you got to make sure your prologue is not boring. So, with prologues, the main problem is that with all the desire to get as much information in as possible, people can tend to lean into stuff that they're like, oh, I just really want this detail in there for no reason. Is it essential to the story, and will it make your readers actually want to read more, or will they come away feeling like, that was not interesting at all? Now, this is where beta readers come into effect. You might think it's the most interesting chapter / prologue you've ever read in your life. And then if your beta readers say, actually, I'm really bored, you got to figure out why. That way you can analyze how to make it better. I would say make sure that your beta readers are not family and not really, really close friends. I would say make sure that you pick a family member that you trust and then tell them to give it to a friend. Because then you know it's someone you semi-trust because it's a friend of a family member, but at the same time, it is not someone who's going to be biased because they know you super well. You got to make sure that they don't know you super well. If they know you, that's fine, but you got to make sure that they don't know you super well, because then they might have a tendency to not tell you the truth about how they really feel about it. Alright, the next one is that prologues tend to be too long. You want to make sure that your prologue follows the basic screenwriting tip of in late, out early. You want to make sure that you're jumping right into the action and the drama and exiting before the drama and action is fully come to a close. That means that not only will it be short and quick and punchy and succinct, but it will also make it so that your readers feel like they have something to hang on to and are interested in when they jump in. Make sure... another thing to avoid, moving on, is different style. If you do first person in the prologue and then third person the rest of the time, it's going to totally throw off the reader. Or vice versa, if you do third person and then first person the rest of the time. Totally going to throw off the reader. You also want to make sure that it's not a completely different style in the regard that if you're writing a horror, the prologue is not a humor. If it's a dark humor, that's fine, but if it's like completely slapstick, lighthearted comedy, and then all of a sudden we get into this raging, crazy thriller horror thing, it's going to completely throw people off, and they're not going to be interested. It's going to give off all the wrong vibes. Part of it with writing is the fact that you want to give the readers a sense of what's going to be coming from the beginning, a sense of promise, and if you give them the wrong promise, they're going to be so disappointed. And that's going to make them want to put down the book. You want to make sure that you capture the right audience from the beginning by not changing your style. Next, make sure to draw your reader in. Make sure to draw your reader in, but don't use it as an excuse to put off your inciting incident. So some This is some refer to it as the Ice Monster prologue. Now, I've never read Game of Thrones, but supposedly this is what happens. Basically, there's some sort of ice monster attack beforehand. They deal with it, and then you go back to the boring old stuff after the prologue. This can be used well. If you have a story that the person isn't introduced to magic for a while, that is fine. For example, Harry Potter's first chapter could be also considered a prologue. If she just slapped prologue on it, it would basically be the same thing, where he's getting dropped off on the doorstep, right? And you see all these magical things happening, and you know that there's magic, but then you don't see magic for a good while of the rest of the story, right? That is perfectly fine. You just got to make sure that, like with Harry Potter, you still have the inciting incident show up at a good pacing moment. You shouldn't use an exciting prologue as an excuse to completely put off your inciting incident almost indefinitely. That's not going to keep your readers hooked. You want to make sure that you use it as a hook, and then you don't bait and switch and keep it boring for the rest of the time. You want to make sure you hook them, and then you draw them along with how is this going to connect, and then you finally connect it right about the time that they're about to get tired of it. You don't want them to get tired of it, because if they get tired of it, they'll put the book down. But if you want to stretch it to their limits, you can do that. Next, and the final one, is a world building dump. This tends to have people put it down the fastest just because of the fact that it's too much all at once. The reader feels like they're drowning in details and drowning in things that they need to learn and drowning in things that they need to keep track of, drowning in characters, drowning in magic, whatever have you. This is particularly true of epic fantasy and science fiction. If you're going to have a prologue that has a lot of world building, again, try to show the world building more than you blab about it. Showing your world building is excellent. It makes us feel immersed in the world, and it makes us feel excited. But just going, by the way, the dragonflies are blue because they're magic, and blah, 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 it leads your readers to go, my head's exploding. I'm going to put the book down. So in general, I would say avoid these 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. These 8, I have 2 more. There we go, I knew I had more. I would say in general to avoid these things, here are some other things to avoid in prologues. Avoid making it so that way you're revealing all the important information up front. You should always keep a little thing secret from your reader, a little something important secret from your reader, because then you can drag it out and keep their interest and reveal it later through the story rather than just giving all the excitement up front and then the rest of the story is just kind of bland. You also want to make sure that the character's point of view does come up later, that if the character's point of view does come up later in the story, so like we talked about, it has to be relevant, would it just work better as a first chapter? Some prologues, honestly, would be better as a first chapter. For example, with Harry Potter, I think they made the right move in doing the first chapter, the way they did it, because of the fact that it didn't really feel it felt right. It didn't feel like it should be a prologue, but at the same time, it totally could have been. It had the potential to go either way. Does the character's so if the character's point of view comes up later in the story, I would say honestly just have it be a first chapter. Especially if you're doing traditionally publishing. If you're doing indie publishing, you have less of a problem with prologues, but if you're doing traditional, you will have an incredibly hard time finding an agent and a publisher. Not saying you won't. Obviously, lots of traditionally published books get put with prologues in them. I mean, we see them all the time. However, the problem comes in when your prologue is either too interesting and the rest of the story is boring, or your prologue is not interesting enough and so there's no reason for it. In general, most people I've run into for publishers say if there's a prologue, they immediately become less inclined to publish it because of the fact that they feel like if you don't do a prologue right, it can be bad. and it's so infrequently done correctly that it automatically has a stigma with it. Again, not to say that you can't do it. You absolutely can. Just know it's going to be a lot of a harder fight trying to convince your publisher slash agent that the prologue is not only necessary, but that it does not make it so that the rest of the book is either boring or the fact that it's not necessary at all. With that being said, I would absolutely encourage you to write prologues. I love a good prologue. There are all sorts of different types of prologues, all sorts of different best practices for prologues. I hope this is able to help you really nail that prologue so that you can impress that agent, impress that publisher, and make sure to find your way forward, because I think that this is a good way to go. And if you want to go independent, by all means, prologues are fantastic. Just make sure you get a decent editor so that way you make sure to avoid these types of things. I hope you have a great day, and remember about the first chapter contest due on November 30th. I hope that you guys will enter. Thank you.